Hi everybody, my name is Paul Gerard. I'm a student loan consultant for the American Dental Education Association, ADEA. Thank you very much for your interest in this presentation on financing your dental school education. We hope that this presentation will support and enhance the information you may have already received from the dental school you're planning to attend as you work very closely with the professionals in the financial aid office as you put together a financing plan for your dental school education. We're going to cover a number of things in today's presentation. In the first part, we're going to look at some comments on the cost, and then in the second part, we'll look at some information on student debt and your actual student loan portfolio, what you might be borrowing for dental school. We're going to talk about the changes that have happened in terms of legislation and how that can impact your borrowing and repayment. And perhaps, guys, some things to keep on your radar screen as you go through dental school. And then we'll certainly wrap this up with some resources for you and perhaps a to-do list, some action items for you as you go forward. As we go through this presentation, some things to put out on the table just to kind of put in the back of your mind to be thinking about. First of all, while we would encourage you to lean on the financial aid office and ADEA for information on how these programs actually work, we'd also encourage you to talk to your colleagues, talk to those folks who are already in dental school, and if you can find some folks, talk to some folks who are out, who are actually in a residency or postdoctoral program, or perhaps have already started their practice, and talk to them about how they finance dental school and especially what they did about repayment of student loans. And what we think you'll find is they'll share with you some things they wish they had done differently, and they'll also share with you some things that actually work for them. So get the details on the programs from the financial aid professionals and the financial aid office and from ADEA and the Go Dental site, but talk to your colleagues about how they pull this off. Always a good idea. We think you're going to see, and you may already know about this, a shift or continued shift of moving the responsibility of paying for dental education to you guys and away from the federal government. And that's just been a trend that continues, and we'll talk about a couple of examples of that a little bit later. We hope that this information will help reduce the influence that the debt may have that you take out in dental school toward your career decisions, whether or not you want to do a residency or postdoctoral program, and then what kind of practice you get into. So that's part of the reason for doing these workshops. We think you may also find that the complexity of repayment is almost as much of a concern as how much you may have to borrow. So the better you do, the better job you do of educating yourself on how all this stuff works, the better off you'll be when you graduate. The student loans are really but one piece of the financial picture, and as you get a better understanding of how your loans work, that may help you when you graduate and you are perhaps trying to borrow money to start a practice or buy into a practice, or perhaps trying to borrow money for a mortgage, etc. So your student loans are but one piece of your financial picture, an important piece, but only one piece of that overall financial plan, if you will. And you're going to hear constant references about working with the financial aid office. Remember, dental school is 4 years, and repayment can take longer than that. And so you're going to be establishing a long-term relationship with the financial aid office, and hopefully you remember this from the dental school guide provided by ADEA, but we encourage you to think about the big picture, how to finance the full dental school degree, but you're going to be applying for financial aid every year, and so you're going to be working with the financial aid office on an annual basis. So get that relationship going early and keep it strong. Okay, part one today, we're going to look at some comments on the cost as part of our agenda. And pretty much any time I've talked to any degree students about the cost of their degree, there are three categories: opportunity cost, out-of-pocket cost, and financing cost. We're going to talk about the latter two in this workshop. But as you probably know, opportunity costs are the lost income that you're giving up, or the income you're giving up by going to dental school for 4 years. And if you were already working or you are currently working, it's the income you're going to be giving up by giving up your job. Now, hopefully you've heard that dental school, your career is going to be one where you should do very well financially, and that may be one of the reasons you're interested in dentistry. So we're not going to talk about opportunity costs, but they certainly are part of the overall equation. We're going to look mainly at out-of-pocket cost and financing costs. So let's take a look at those right now. What you should be seeing is a sample first-year cost of attendance, and notice all the different categories: tuition and fees, insurance, medical insurance, an allowance for books and supplies, your living expenses with room and board, transportation, and then personal and miscellaneous. And in this particular example, and this is just, guys, a sample, we come up with about close to $60,000, $59,600. And you may not see the categories listed exactly this way at your school, but if you go to the school's website or you contact the financial aid office, you'll see the cost of attendance. It's also called the student financial aid budget. You'll see something that looks similar to this. Now notice I've now highlighted 3 categories: room and board, transportation, personal, and miscellaneous. And you're probably way ahead of me here and probably know why I did that. That's because when you look at your budget, there's some items you have no control over, and there's some items that you do have control over. And in this particular case, with these particular numbers, about a third of this budget is in areas that you would have some control over. And it's important that you know what this figure is at the school you're attending, because if you know how much you should be required to be living on each month and you can get in under that budget, not only is it going to mean you borrow less, but it means you will repay less. So guys, the takeaway here is when you look at the cost of attendance, find out what it is at your school. Find out what the monthly living allowance is, and then try to get in under it if at all possible. And nobody's going to preach at you about this, but one of the reasons it's important to do that and to find out what the living allowance budget is that your ability to budget now and in dental school is going to help drive your repayment strategy, and guys, help protect your choices in practice, including residency and postdoctoral programs. And here's an example. I'm going to show you some figures in a moment about repayment plans, and you'll see that one of the repayment options available to you is to take your loans and spread them out over 25 years. Well, you're probably also well ahead of me on this. At the current interest rates, I don't know too many folks who would want to hang on to a student loan portfolio at 6.8% and 7.9% for 25 years. But you might initially choose an extended repayment plan to help you finance a mortgage or to borrow money to buy into a practice by using that to show a lower monthly payment to your financing company. That's different from somebody who feels forced into an extended repayment plan because they have built up a lot of consumer debt or other obligations in dental school, and when they get out, they want to pay it in a shorter 10-year period of time, but they can't afford to because they have all this other stuff they've got to address, like consumer debt, etc. So the better you learn to budget now, it's going to help preserve your choices later on. So that's a little quick look at out-of-pocket costs. Let's look now at financing costs. And guys, this is where we talk about the real cost of borrowing those student loans. You're going to have to borrow, many of you will have to borrow for dental school. As you can imagine, there's several factors that influence what you're going to pay on those loans. First and foremost, obviously, the interest rates. And on federal Stafford loans, hopefully you've heard, it's a 6.8 fixed rate. If you go to Grad Plus loans, which we'll look at in a moment, those are at 7.9% fixed. But another factor is whether the loan has what's called a subsidy. Is it interest-free during school and during any kind of a grace period, or is there a lack of subsidy? And hopefully you've heard that it's usually the latter. The majority of the loans, and for many of you, all the loans you borrow in dental school are going to be accruing interest along the way. So you look at interest rates, you look at is there a subsidy or lack of subsidy, and then you also look at what's called interest capitalization. This interest that's building up during school, during your 4 years of dental school, at some point your loan provider is going to take that and add it back to the principal of your loan. And that's what causes some of these horror stories in terms of the debt getting to be so high. So know what the interest rates are. Be sure you know if your loan has a subsidy or not, and don't expect them to have one. There are very few that do. And then know the capitalization policy, how often that's going to happen. Now, something else, the repayment strategy and the repayment plan that you choose. If you choose an extended plan and stay in it, you're going to pay a lot more than one of your colleagues who borrowed the same amount but who gets into a 10-year plan and maybe aggressively pays the loan down. And notice you don't really have a lot of control, if any at all, on the interest rates, the subsidy, and capitalization policy, but you do have control over the repayment strategy and the repayment plan that you choose. So financing costs is very important. Look for ways to reduce what you borrow. We talked about that with budgeting, and ways to reduce your repayment costs. And here's some maybe common sense ways you might be able to do that. First of all, be absolutely sure you meet all financial aid office deadlines, because remember, you may hopefully be applying for grants and scholarships, and information is available in the financial aid office about how to do that and how not to miss deadlines. You don't want to miss out on free money if it's available. Keep your consumer debt in check. We've already talked about that. And if you have a family member or significant other or spouse or partner who's indicated an interest in helping you in dental school, but they say they just can't pay tuition, but if there's an interest in helping you, see if maybe they could pay the interest on one of your loans, even for 1 year, as it accrues, because what that does, guys, that effectively turns that loan into a subsidized loan for that period of time. So if anybody's offered to help, that might be a way that they could. Use caution with private loans. We're going to talk about private loans here in just a moment. Budget wisely and borrow responsibly. We've already mentioned that. And this is jumping way ahead here, but when you get out, if you have different loans at different interest rates and you start aggressively going after your loans, which many of your colleagues who graduated do, you can actually start targeting that additional money on your worst loan. For example, if you've got if you've got a monthly payment of a couple of $1,000s on your student loans, and you're in a position to overpay, be sure you target that overpayment on a loan like Grad Plus, if you have a Grad Plus, because that's a higher interest rate. So long story short, control what you can control, and these are just some ways to take a look at reducing your cost. Now in part 2, we're going to start looking at student debt and some changes and things to keep on the radar screen, and some resources and action items for you. So let's take a look at the kind of loans you may have for dental school. You see a list here with 2 highlighted in red, and that's not to necessarily encourage you to take these out. It's just that for the majority of dental school students who borrow, their borrowing is going to come in Federal Stafford and then Federal Grad Plus. And what many of your colleagues do is they get as much as they can in the Federal Stafford loan program, and then if they need more money, they go to what's called the Federal Grad Plus. And remember, Stafford is at 6.8 fixed rate. The Federal Grad Plus is at 7.9% fixed rate. Contact the financial aid office about what are called campus-based loans. These are loans like Federal Perkins, Health Profession student loans, loans for disadvantaged students, and some schools have their own loan programs. And these are called campus-based because the school acts as the lender. Not all schools participate in these programs, but check with your aid office because they may. And then we have private loans listed because some dental students are still interested in private loans, and again, I'm going to talk about the differences between federal and private in a moment. Notice that there's an asterisk beside Stafford, Grad Plus, and Perkins. These loans can be referenced on what's called the National Student Loan Data System at nslds.ed.gov. If you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, then you're going to hear me say this when we wrap this up, one of your action items is to do an inventory of your current borrowing if you already have student loans, and you can do that on the NSLDS site. This is just, guys, a federal database or federal repository that your loan servicers feed into to help you get a one-stop kind of shopping or one-stop snapshot of all the borrowing you already have. So you get a cumulative running total of all your Stafford, Grad Plus, Perkins, and consolidation loans. If you have those, you'll always see those on NSLDS. And guys, you'll see them regardless of the status and whether they've been paid in full or they've been moved to another company and maybe another loan servicer. NSLDS is a great place to see all your federal borrowing, Stafford, Grad Plus, Perkins, and consolidation in one place. Also, if you're wondering who your servicers are, and maybe you've been getting information on that or that happens while you're in dental school, If you go to NSLDS and you click on the number to the left of each loan when you first get your listing of loans, you'll get a back page that gives you information on who your loan servicer is. So NSLDS is a great place to do kind of an inventory of your federal borrowing. Now, private and institutional loans are not on NSLDS. You're going to be needing to go to your own papers and disclosure statements and copies of promissory notes for information on those. But NSLDS, be sure you bookmark that site. It's a great place to get information on your loans. Now, some things about the borrowing for dental school graduates. Hopefully you've heard this. Dental school graduates are in the top 5% of wage earners in the United States. So there's a great confidence that even though you borrow, you're going to be able to effectively pay these loans back. And you probably already know this, but one of the reasons for that is, without getting into specific percentages, the majority of dental school graduates are going to enter the income stream faster. And this is no adverse comment on your colleagues in the other health sciences disciplines, but because of dental school and moving into the income stream faster, you may be in a position to aggressively pay your loans off sooner than someone who, for example, is required to do a residency program. You may choose to do a residency. You may even choose to do a postdoctoral program, but many of you will be getting into the income stream faster and be in a position to aggressively pay the loans down sooner. Now, some additional comments on the debt. Some kind of sort of good news, actually. In the class of 2011, 1 in 5 graduated with either no debt at all or had educational debt well under the national average for dental school graduates at under $80,000. And the gauntlet has been laid down, if you will. Your colleagues who graduated have a great track record for repaying their student loans, and the same is certainly going to be expected of you. So, again, borrow responsibly, but keep in touch with the financial aid office about your repayment options, because your colleagues have set a great track record for you here. Something else about your debt, and hopefully you already know this, you can fund the entire cost of your dental education with federal funds, no private loans needed at all, because once you max out on federal Stafford loans, you can borrow up to the full cost of attendance with Grad Plus, and that is regardless of what the cost of attendance figure is at your school. A few more things. Multiple repayment options are available on your federal student loans, including plans that are tied to your income. So if you don't quite get the income you'd like right out of the gate and your debt is pretty high, you may be eligible to start repaying with a program tied to your income. There are multiple loan repayment programs available where, in exchange for service, organizations like the National Health Service Corps, NIH, and the Indian Health Service will help repay for you part of your debt. And then there is a program, forgiveness program called the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that you may be eligible for if you're willing to go into 10 years of nonprofit or public service work, and your financial aid office can help you with these programs. So lots of options for you to consider, but remember, borrow responsibly, because you don't want to use any of these options as an excuse to borrow more than you really need. Speaking of which, let's take a look at right now what about $180,000, which is very close to the mean debt for the class of 2011. Let's take a look at what it would look like in terms of repayment. And guys, the assumptions I'm using here are max of $162,000 in unsub Stafford at a 6.8% rate, and the remainder with Grad Plus, evenly split over 4 years of dental school at 7.9%. On a standard 10-year plan, you're looking at about $2,500 a month. Now, is that something you could afford, or your colleagues who just graduated could afford? Obviously, that depends on a lot of things, but that's what a standard 10-year payment amount would look like, and it'd be close to $300,000 if this graduate took that long to pay the loan off. Remember, there's no penalty for early payment, so the figure does not have to be quite that high. Well, what if this same borrower said, I can't handle that, I need to look at an extended 25-year plan? The payment drops by about $1,000, but obviously the total repayment goes up. But guys, once again, that's if the loan is held for the full 25 years. This is an example of somebody who might initially get in a 25-year plan to get a more affordable payment and then could aggressively pay the loan off. So we'd encourage you, and I'm going to mention this before we wrap this up, we'd encourage you to run repayment numbers every time you take out a new loan so you always know what your current repayment looks like. Now, we mentioned federal versus private loans, and for a number of years we've not even had to discuss private loans, but because some of the interest rates on some of the private loans have dropped, in some cases pretty dramatically, and some would, to be perfectly honest, a lot of folks actually think the interest rates on the federal student loans are pretty high at 6.8 and 7.9, all of a sudden there's been an interest in some borrowers of, well, should I consider borrowing private loans? Let's take a look at the differences. And I think it's safe to say that nobody's going to be heavy-handed about this, but guys, the general rule of thumb is always go federal first before you'd ever remotely consider a private loan. And I think when we go through this slide, you'll see why. We'd also encourage you to always talk to the financial aid officer if you have any interest in a private loan. Federal loans have fixed rates, and with private, although there's some lenders who are offering fixed rate loans, the majority of private loans are still variable, and while they may sound low, in many cases they have no cap, or the cap is way up at something like 18%. And remember how long you could have these loans, 4 years of dental school, and then if you do a postdoc or a residency program, it could extend it beyond that. Probably one of the biggest differences is there are multiple repayment and postponement options available on federal loans. Guys, much more flexibility here when compared with private loans, and that's one of the things to really take note of. Also with federal, as we mentioned, between a combination of Stafford and Grad Plus, you can borrow all the way up to your cost of attendance, would never need a private loan. And with private loans, there tend to be borrowing limits, not only on an annual basis, but on a cumulative basis as well. There's a national database that's kept for your federal, Stafford, Grad Plus, and Perkins loans and consolidation loans. There's no such thing with private loans. So kind of sort of easier to track the federal loans than it is your private. Minimal credit check, and there are pros and cons to that, but with terms of federal loans, the only credit check that's done is on a Grad Plus loan, and that's with a relatively easy credit ready check. And then on the private loans, it's a credit-worthy check. It says credit-ready there, but a credit-worthy check, and this is where your private loan company might be looking at your credit score or the credit score of a credit-worthy cosigner if, in fact, you bring on a credit-worthy cosigner. The financial aid officer certifies the federal loans. The financial aid officer does not necessarily have to sign off on a private loan if it's what's called a direct-to-consumer loan. Most of the private loans, your financial officer will need to sign, but occasionally you may get marketed by a company that basically says you can do this private loan and you're the only one who has to sign it. Be very cautious about direct-to-consumer private loans. Federal loans are eligible for consolidation, and there are very limited options for consolidation on private loans. And the last thing is the federal direct Stafford and direct Grad Plus and direct consolidation loans are eligible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And guys, that's just not the case with a private loan. So hopefully what you see here is that the options are much better for you, much more flexibility with federal loans as opposed to private. And once again, if you have some concerns about this and you're thinking about a private loan, we would really encourage you to talk with a financial aid office. Now let's talk quickly about some changes and some things to kind of keep on your radar screen as you matriculate into dental school and go through dental school. Hopefully you've heard that there is no subsidy on new Stafford loans, and this is for Stafford loans for enrollment periods on or after July 1, 2012. If you're starting dental school and you already have a subsidized Stafford loan, there's no change to that loan. It's going to be interest-free during dental school and during the grace period if you still have the grace period on that loan. They're just no new subsidized Stafford loans. Nothing you can do about that, but that's all the more reason for you to borrow responsibly, because now all your Stafford borrowing is going to be in an unsub program. There are no discounts for timely payment. It used to be that you could get a small discount for paying your loans on time, and that's not the case anymore. There have been a number of changes to the income-related plans. These are the plans that you might be interested in. It's the standard, graduated, and 25-year extended plan we looked at are not plans that you can afford right out of dental school. Nothing you really need to do about that now other than just keep on the radar screen to work with the financial aid officer to be sure you understand how the income-related repayment plans work or could help you. I mentioned here Direct Stafford and Direct Grad Plus. Guys, this simply means that all the Stafford and Grad Plus borrowing you do in dental school, the loans are going to come directly from the federal government, and the Department of Education will be serving as the lender on behalf of the federal government. So you're going to see a reference to Direct Stafford and Direct Grad Plus. Something else to keep on the radar screen, although there is a commitment by the Department of Education to be sure that you only have one servicer for all the loans that they make for you and that they own of yours, there are many servicers out there now, and occasionally, as you may already know, your loans are moved from one servicer to another. So always be sure you open mail that looks like it's student loan related, and remember you can go to the NSLDS site to see who your loan servicer is, and hopefully all the loans you're going to be taking out will be with one servicer. And then we mentioned already private loans tend to be back in play because some of the interest rates are really pretty low, at least initially, and some folks have been interested in, is this something I should consider? Once again, talk to the financial aid folks about private loans if you have any interest there. The last thing we want to do is look at some resources and action items for you. And in terms of resources, we continue to mention the financial aid office, certainly ADEA at the ADEA.org site, and a new website now for ADEA, and the GoDental.org site, which is where you're watching this video. Lots of stuff there to help you out. Well, first of all, we'd encourage you to do an inventory of the current loans you may have outstanding. If you've borrowed from undergrad or post-bac, as we discussed for your federal loans, do an inventory by going to the NSLDS site, and that will give you a listing of any Stafford, Grad Plus, Perkins, or consolidation loans you may already have. Be sure to pay down consumer obligations. Remember, your consumer debt, your credit card payments, things like that cannot be added to your financial aid budget. You can't borrow federal funds for that. We'd encourage you to project your borrowing needs each year and go ahead and run some estimated repayment numbers so you have an idea along the way not only what you're going to be borrowing, but what it's going to look like when you graduate and enter repayment. Go ahead and start sharpening your budgeting skills, because remember, the better job you do of reducing your cost of attendance while you're in dental school, the less you're going to have to borrow. If you have family members, a spouse, a partner, a significant other who's talked to you about possibly helping while you're in dental school, talk to them about the possibility of paying the interest on one of your loans at least for a year while you're in dental school. That will certainly help reduce what you repay. And very important, as we've said all along, be sure to establish contact with the professionals in the financial aid office. You'll be working with them for 4 years, and they're delighted to help you.